Good morning. Good morning. Welcome. Good morning and welcome. My name is Timothy Kaspar. I serve at Hillsdale College as Associate Vice President for External Affairs. I'm also Deputy Editor of Imprimis, and I have the privilege of teaching in the college's Politics Department. I'm a graduate of the college, which was way back in 1994, so that's starting to seem like a long time ago. I'll be your MC for today's program. So welcome again to this National Leadership Seminar on the Constitution and Current Politics. As President Arnn stated so eloquently last night, there is an important public debate going on over the meaning of our Constitution. On the one side of the debate are those who seek a return to the kind of limited constitutional government of the American founders. I think maybe there are some of those in this room. On the other side of the debate, we can place the president, I hasten to add, of America, not of Hillsdale. The president and his fellow progressives who see no limits to the size of government and to what it might accomplish. And by the way, that will take money, lots of it. The Conservative News Service noted a few days ago that the federal government has raked in over $1 trillion, $1 trillion of your tax dollars in the current budget year, and still managed to go $200 billion over budget in the same period. These progressives are the sorts of folks that one of my political heroes, Ronald Reagan, had in mind when he joked that the 10 most dangerous words in the English language are, "Hi, I'm from the government and I'm here to help." Reagan was joking, as he so often did, but he was also making a serious point, as he so often did. Americans then and now face a choice between limited and unlimited government. As Reagan put it in his first inaugural, our choice is between self-rule or rule by the so-called experts of the administrative state. So it's in this political context that we convene this National Leadership Seminar. Our first speaker today is Heather McDonald. Ms. McDonald is the Thomas W. Smith Fellow at the Manhattan Institute and a contributing editor of City Journal. She earned her JD at Stanford University Law School and describes herself as a non-practicing lawyer. I think we call that a recovering lawyer. She writes about a range of topics including homeland security, policing and racial profiling, educational policy, and immigration, which is her topic today. Her excellent work has won her numerous awards, including a 2005 Bradley Prize. She testifies frequently before Congress, appears quite often on television, and writes for many other publications in addition to City Journal, such as the Wall Street Journal, Washington Post, National Review, The New Criterion, and many others. Her book titles include Are Cops Racist? How the War Against the Police Harms Black Americans, and The Immigration Solution, A Better Plan Than Today's, which is co-authored with Hillsdale College Distinguished Fellow Victor Davis Hanson and Stephen Malanga. Her lecture title today is Practical Thoughts on Immigration. Please welcome Heather McDonald.
Thank you so much. This is an extraordinary honor and pleasure to be at the National Leadership Seminar, to be out of New York, where we're experiencing a little global cooling this winter, but especially living in New York, you often forget that there's people still in America who actually believe that the founders did a pretty good job in drafting the Constitution and creating the framework for this country. And to see so many of you here today is quite heartening, and I'm going to bring this memory back with me when I go back to the bastion of the New York Times. Now, President Arnn last night spoke very dramatically and powerfully about the constitutional crisis, as he deemed it, facing conservatives today. And this morning, I'm going to speak about one particular crisis. The lesson from the last 20 years of immigration policy is that lawlessness breeds more lawlessness. Once a people or government decides to normalize one form of lawbreaking, other forms of lawlessness will follow until finally the rule of law itself is in jeopardy. Last July, when I accepted Mr. Bell's kind invitation to speak to the Hillsdale National Leadership Seminar, I had long been tracking various immigration-related assaults on the rule of law. But I did not foresee that a constitutional crisis was just on the horizon. President Obama has decided that because Congress has not granted amnesty to millions of illegal aliens living in the United States, he will do so himself. Now let us ponder for a moment just how shameless this assertion of power is. Article 2, Section 3 of the Constitution says that the President shall take care that the laws be faithfully executed. That provision assumes that there is a law for the President to execute. But in this case, the alleged problem that Obama is purporting to fix is the absence of a law granting amnesty to millions of illegal aliens. Obama is not executing a law, he is making one up all by himself, arrogating to himself a function that the Constitution explicitly allocates to Congress. Should this outrageous and blatantly unconstitutional power grab stand, we will have moved very far in the direction of rule by dictator. Pace Obama, the absence of a congressional law granting amnesty is not evidence of a political failure that he must somehow correct by unilateral executive action. It is evidence of the lack of a popular consensus regarding amnesty. There has been no amnesty statute because the political will for such an amnesty is lacking. Now, fortunately, on late Monday, a federal district judge in Texas acknowledged this obvious fact and in a bracing opinion struck down or put on hold for the moment Obama's executive amnesty, acknowledging the arguments of half of the states in the country that this would impose enormous fiscal burdens on them, but more profoundly, that Obama had violated the Constitution. It's not the end of the story, unfortunately. This will undoubtedly be appealed to the Fifth Circuit of Appeals in Texas, which has recently been busily contorting itself into knots, trying to justify under the Constitution racial preferences in admissions at the University of Texas. So this is not a slam dunk that we have a court here that will be willing to uphold the Constitution and the Congress's prerogative over immigration matters. But for the moment, at least, this amnesty is on hold. Now, Democrats are assiduously pretending that the Obama executive amnesty is merely an innocuous exercise of prosecutorial discretion. And if it is ultimately upheld by either the Fifth Circuit or the Supreme Court, they will rue the day that they acceded to this travesty when a Republican president decides, say, to privatize Social Security because Congress has failed to do so. Now, Obama's executive amnesty is the most public and egregious example of immigration lawlessness to date. But beneath the radar screen has been an equally telling saga of cascading lawlessness that is arguably as consequential for our country's future. I am referring to the attack on the Secure Communities program and on deportation more generally. I hope to convince you this morning that because of this attack, the rallying cry of so many well-meaning conservatives that we must, quote, secure the borders, is a naive and meaningless delusion. The Secure Communities program is a commonsensical response to illegal alien criminality. Whenever an illegal alien is booked into a local jail for a crime, an alert is automatically sent to the federal immigration authorities in the Immigration and Customs Enforcement Agency, or ICE. ICE agents can then ask that the jail or prison briefly hold the illegal alien after he has served his jail or prison time, rather than releasing him back into the community, so that ICE can pick him up to begin deportation proceedings against him. This is known as a detainer. You would think that such a program would be wholly uncontroversial. An alien who crosses into the country illegally already has no claim to undisturbed presence here. He has already voluntarily assumed the risk of deportation. But an illegal alien who then goes on to break other laws has even less claim to protection from deportation. And yet, Secure Communities has been the target of incessant protest from illegal alien advocates since its inception. They make the astonishing claim that it is unfair to remove an illegal alien who commits other crimes. Even more astonishing, over 300 jurisdictions, including New York State, New York City, California, Chicago, and Los Angeles, agree. They have openly refused to honor ICE's requests for detainers, but instead have released tens of thousands of criminals back to the streets, where they easily evade ICE detection. Not that ICE would even think of trying to pick them up. Indeed, the irony regarding Secure Communities is that ICE rarely uses its power under the program. In 2012, the last year for which we have complete records, the agency was notified of over 400,000 illegal alien jail detainees, but removed only 19% of those. The removal rate was on track to be even lower in 2013. About 50% of those criminal illegal aliens whom ICE chooses not to deport reoffend upon release. Now, there are two aspects of the campaign against Secure Communities that bear particular notice. First, the hypocrisy of the Obama administration and the advocates. And second, the hypocrisy of big city police chiefs. In 2012, Arizona became the target of universal contempt among the country's elites for passing a law that encouraged local law enforcement officers to assist ICE with immigration enforcement. But according to illegal alien advocates and the Obama administration, this law, known as SB 1070, was an unconstitutional state usurpation of the federal government's plenary power under the Constitution over immigration matters. That includes both Congress and the executive branch. The Obama administration sued Arizona for allegedly interfering with federal authority over immigration and won an injunction against SB 1070, and it's subsequently been basically gutted. Yet now, those same advocates are successfully urging states and localities to defy the federal government's requests for immigration assistance, resulting in the creation of local sanctuary zones where federal immigration authority cannot reach. If ever there were a lawless usurpation of the federal government's power over immigration, the open revolt against Secure Communities is it. And yet, the Obama administration, rather than hauling these recalcitrant jurisdictions to court, has lain supine and is chastely looking the other way. And late last year, it threw in the towel completely and dismantled the Secure Communities program, agreeing with the activists that it was unfair to illegal alien criminals to put them under any worry that they may face a risk of deportation. But there is another aspect of the campaign against Secure Communities that shows how corrosive this tolerance of immigration lawlessness is. Major police chiefs in immigration jurisdictions are under enormous political pressure to protect illegal aliens. And that has meant tossing aside everything that they know about public safety and policing. One of the great insights of policing over the last 2 decades was the realization that low-level misdemeanor offenses like graffiti, turnstile jumping, drunk driving, and drug sales have an outsized impact on a community's perceptions of public safety and on the actual reality of crime. Criminals are rarely scrupulous about obeying the law. enforcing misdemeanor offenses is an effective way of incapacitating more serious criminals. But even when an offender does not go on to commit more violent felonies, such allegedly minor offenses as shoplifting and illegal street vending create a lawlessness and disorder that breaks down the fabric of a community. Police chiefs like New York's William Bratton and Los Angeles' Charles Beck know this, and yet they have fiercely opposed cooperating with the federal government on secure communities on the ground that misdemeanor offenses are really too trivial to worry about and should not subject an illegal alien to deportation. This is pure hypocrisy, the result of the enormous pressures of demographic change on our principles. The ultimate goal of the Secure Communities program is to delegitimate deportation entirely as a response to illegal immigration. If it is morally unacceptable to deport even a convicted illegal alien criminal, then it is all the more unacceptable to deport someone who has merely crossed the border illegally. The undermining of deportation is behind those constant protests demanding, in the words of the protesters, to end deportations now. It is behind the claim that it is Americans who are to blame for separating families, rather than the alien who knowingly came into the country in violation of our immigration laws and assumed the risk of being sent home. The campaign against deportation does not name itself as such, but it has been highly successful. Despite the false rhetoric of the Obama administration, deportation has basically disappeared from the interior of the country. The removal rate in 2014 for illegal aliens who were not explicit ICE priorities was 0.05%. Now, what's the consequence of eliminating deportation as a response to illegal immigration? If someone cannot be removed for illegal entry, then there is no more immigration law. Deportation is the only remedy for illegal entry that actually corrects and deters the original lawbreaking. For that reason, Mexico and every other country on earth practices it. Even if the activists would accept a fine as a penalty for illegal entry, and that's not at all clear, that fine simply becomes the cost of entering. Lose deportation as we are doing, and the United States will have formally ceded control of its immigration policy to people living outside the borders. National sovereignty will have become meaningless, and formal immigration policy a nullity. And the delegitimation of deportation is why the conservative rallying cry to secure the borders is so naive. An utterly secure border is impossible. People will always find a way to cross. But if, once they cross, nothing can be done to them, then we may as well not have any borders at all. That's why the advocates have spent all their energy fighting deportation rather than fighting increased border security, because they know that eradicating the former is far more important. Now, the erosion of the rule is bad enough, but the social consequence of mass illegal immigration is equally troubling. We are importing poverty and educational failure. If you want to see America's future, look no further than my home state of California, which is a generation ahead of the rest of the country in experiencing the effects of unchecked immigration from the South. Nearly 50% of all California births are now Hispanic. The state's Hispanic population is now almost equal to the white population, and its school-age population is vastly majority Hispanic. The consequences of this demographic shift have been profound. In the 1950s and 1960s, California led in educational achievement. Today, with a majority Hispanic K-12 population and the largest concentration of English language learners in the country, California is at the bottom of the educational heap, barely distinguishable in its national test scores from such economic backwaters as Mississippi, Alabama, and Louisiana. Over a third of California 8th graders lack even the most rudimentary math skills. 28% are equally deficient in reading. The mathematics performance gap between Hispanic and white 8th graders has not budged since 1990. The reading gap has improved only slightly since 1998. California is at the epicenter of a disturbing phenomenon known as long-term English language learners. Now, you would think that an English learner would be somebody who grew up in a foreign country, speaking a foreign language, who came to the US only later in life. In fact, the vast majority of designated English learners are born here, but their cognitive and language skills are so low that they are deemed non-native English speakers. Nationally, 30% of all English language learners are third-generation Americans. There's a problem of assimilation going on. In 2013, California Governor Jerry Brown pushed through a controversial law to try to close the achievement gap in California between California's growing Hispanic population and its Anglo and Asian populations. That law redistributes tax dollars from successful schools to those with high proportions of English learners and low-income students. It remains to be seen whether this latest effort to raise the education outcomes of the children of low-skilled immigrants will prove more effective than its predecessors. Working against that possibility is Hispanics' high dropout rate, the highest of any group in the nation, and their equally unmatched teen pregnancy rate. Now, to be sure, many illegal Hispanics who come here possess admirable work ethic, one that Americans should emulate. And some have turned around very troubled inner city communities like South Central LA, or at least have started them on an upward trajectory. But thanks to their lack of social capital, many of their children and grandchildren are getting sucked up into underclass culture. The Hispanic out-of-wedlock birth rate in California and the US is 53%, twice what it was when the black population in 1965, when Daniel Patrick Moynihan wrote his prescient warning about the catastrophe of black family breakdown. In 65, it was 23% for blacks. And as Larry Kudlow said last night, Moynihan was travestied as a racist, but he was utterly far-seeing in his observation that a 23% illegitimacy rate was a problem. Hispanics are now up to 53%, twice as much. The incarceration rate of Mexican Americans in California shoots up 8 times between the first and second generation to equal the black incarceration rate. Gang involvement is endemic in barrio schools. I wish I could take some of my fellow Open Borders conservatives to the Berendo Middle School in Pico Rivera in Los Angeles, where I've spent time, and they would see a massive social service bureaucracy of anti-gang counselors serving the children of single mothers. This social service bureaucracy in barrio schools is just the tip of the iceberg. Welfare use among immigrants and their progeny is high, the highest in the country, because their poverty rates remain so stubbornly low. Hispanics are the highest users of government health care, and they're the biggest supporters of Obamacare. They favor big government and the higher taxes necessary to pay for it. The claim by Open Borders conservatives that low-skilled immigration is an economic boon to the country is not true. It fails to take into account the government services consumed by low-skilled immigrants and their children, such as education, health care, and prison costs. And it ignores the fact that low-skilled workers pay no income taxes, but instead receive tax credits. So what should be done? First of all, reassert the primacy of the rule of law. That means, at the very least, rehabilitating deportation as a response to illegal immigration and ceasing to normalize illegal immigration with our huge array of sanctuary policies. I fear, however, that that battle is lost. I expect liberals to be indifferent to the erosion of law, but it stuns me that so many of my conservative colleagues are willing to wink at immigration lawbreaking in their eagerness to placate what they believe, I think a little naively, to be a Republican voting bloc in waiting. I would not offer an amnesty to those adult immigrants who have voluntarily entered the country on their own, since every amnesty in the US and Europe has acted as a magnet for more illegal immigration. People who come into the country illegally or overstay their visas do so knowingly. They assume the risk of illegal status. It is not our responsibility to wipe it away. Their children, if they are born here, are already American citizens, thanks to the misguided policy of birthright citizenship. The illegal status of their parents is a problem that will eventually fade away as that first generation dies out. As importantly, I would reorient our legal immigration system towards high-skilled immigrants, like the parents of Sergey Brin, the founder of Google. Now, open borders types consistently conflate low-skilled and high-skilled immigration. It's a very effective rhetorical trope. They'll say, well, look at Sergey Brin, look at the billions of value he's created to the American economy, look at the millions of people he's employed. Absolutely right. But that's very different than people who come from a culture that thinks third-grade education is as much as one should attain, and the results speak for themselves. Immigration policy should be forged with one consideration in mind: what is in the country's economic self-interest? Immigration is not a service we provide to the rest of the world. Now, to be sure, we are a nation of immigrants, and we continue to be the most generous nation on earth towards people who want to come to this country legally and join the American dream. But rewarding illegal immigration does an injustice to the many legal immigrants who played by the rules to get here. We owe it to them and to ourselves to adhere to the law. Thank you very much. Any questions? Yeah, I'd love to. Okay. I'd be happy to take questions. If anybody disagrees, that would be even more interesting, but I can't think that's really possible. So.
All right, please raise your hands and we will bring the microphones to you.
Doug Herron.
Hi, Doug.
I have heard their definition of deportation, and it certainly is affecting our borders. I know the explanation I've been given.
An explanation for the change in deportation?
No, the explanation of the definition. Does that make sense?
Do I have an explanation for the definition of deportation?
The change in the definition.
Well, I think it's still being defined as removing somebody from this country to return to his native country. There's various categories, certainly. I mean, what the Obama administration is doing, they go around claiming that deportations are at their highest level ever. And what they're counting is people that they catch right at the border and send them back immediately. That's not what a deportation is. A deportation is when you enter the country and take residence here and then are removed. So removals at the border are not what deportation is. Am I understanding you correctly?
Yes, gotten a little bit different explanation in Arizona from the locals who are affected by this. But that's essentially it. I
Right.
wanted you to say that there is a change so that Obama can challenge and say that he has done a magnificent
Exactly
job.
right. That's what it is. He is counting when Border Patrol agents are on the border and they spot somebody literally crossing and pick that person up, there is usually an expedited removal. But of course, as we saw this summer with the flood of juveniles who were coming across, juveniles being usually like 18-year-olds and sometimes much older, the press was pretending that this was like a bunch of 5-year-olds fleeing gang violence in Guatemala. That simply was not the case. But we had a little advanced picture of what amnesties do, and this juvenile border surge was inspired by the earlier Obama amnesty for the so-called dreamers, the children of illegal aliens. And there too, even though they were being apprehended at the border, the advocates were pushing and pushing to get them into detention centers, and they've been spread throughout the country. There were no real deportations there. They come in, and many communities are having a very hard time providing the education and health care costs of those families. So you're right, at the border, deportation has been redefined in order to give Obama this talking point about him having been so resolute with deportation that now we get an amnesty. Excuse me. I've got a cold. Let me just have a coughing moment. It'll pass. Wow. Thank God for water. Man, I got sick in New York and I haven't been in Florida long enough to get better yet, so that's the problem. Okay, I'm ready. Thank you. I apologize.
Last summer, my wife and I were in Poland.
You were here.
We were in Poland, in Europe, and more than one person remarked how difficult it is for a Polish citizen to get a visa to come to the United States and stay and work. So the immigration policy of this administration is extremely selective, and there are groups that are being targeted that, as you said, would support politically the goals of this administration and the progressives. So I'd like to have you comment on that. And then also, I would like to disagree with you when you said that the single question to be addressed is the economic interest of the nation relative to our immigration policy. I think also there is a moral interest of the nation, as you articulated in this business of adhering to a rule of law.
I agree. But I think that the economic interests are not sufficiently attended to. And the assumption is that we owe this to the rest of the country, but really we have to be, I think, unapologetically aware of what is going to keep us competitive with the rest of the country, with the rest of the world, rather. And America is falling further and further behind educationally. There's a rising proportion of our students who are low income. Now it's way over 50% of American K through 12 students are eligible for free federally subsidized lunches. This is largely because of mass illegal immigration. So it's not in our economic interest. I completely agree with you that it's a moral imperative as well. And yes, there's a sort of emerging theory going out there about the 1965 immigration law that radically revised the traditional sources of immigration away from the European countries, Canada, towards third world countries. And some people are arguing that that was farsighted on the part of Democrats who saw that over the long term what they were going to be bringing in was a Democratic voting bloc, and that's certainly what has been happening. And it's very frustrating that people from places that have a different tradition have such a hard time getting in here. But you know, this recategorization goes on again and again. We have something called the diversity lottery, as if our immigration flows are not diverse enough, which is a totally arbitrary and random system that just hands out visas on a random basis to people. Again, this is the opposite of what we should be doing, which is being very precise about what we want. And this is not some new idea. Canada, Australia, they give points for levels of education and language skills. There's a very good proposal in Congress now. You know, the Democrats are always saying, oh, the Republicans have nothing to say, they've got no proposals. No, they have a series of very targeted, specific laws, one of which would basically, as they say, stamp a green card on every PhD. Because our own education skills are getting so low, our graduate schools in science depend on foreign students. Without people from China and India, I hate to say it, our medical technology would be disappeared. We should make sure that graduate students who come here, man, that's sticky stuff, who come here and take advantage of our still brilliant medical faculties, science faculties, and it's the one good thing about the university that is still intact, but it is so under assault, I cannot tell you. The feminists are coming. There's not a single engineering school in this country that is not under massive pressure to hire faculty and admit students on the basis of gender quotas. I have a friend at the electrical engineering department at UC San Diego. The last 8 candidates that they interviewed for a job were all female. I can tell you that is not an accident. That was created by their dean. Before that, they had a position that had opened up, which is a very rare thing in the University of California because it's so fiscally challenged, thanks to the state's huge fiscal costs from, in large part, but not exclusively, unions have a large part to do with that as well, from mass immigration. So they got the opportunity to hire somebody, and they found the 3 top candidates in the world who all, sadly, happened to be male. Now, they were not all white males, but in the feminist universe now in academia, being a person of color male doesn't count. So their dean told them, these 3 top candidates aren't good enough. Demanded that they interview a subpar female. They voted her down. The dean demanded a second vote by secret ballot, voted her down again. What did the administration do? They then create excellence positions, an extraordinarily Orwellian term for diversity candidates who can't get hired on their qualifications. So in any case, as much as I value our American science faculties, and they are a magnet to universities for alumni donors who are a little bit clueless about the decimation of the humanities and the in the tragic destruction of the legacy of Western civilization that is being propagated by our university system, don't think that the sciences are safe. So in any case, they do depend on foreign graduate students. They should be sent through the system as quickly as possible and encouraged to become American residents and American citizens. Thank you.
You mentioned the argument of prosecutorial discretion. Could you elaborate on that a little?
Well, prosecutorial discretion is just that. It tends to be on a case-by-case basis. That's not what Obama is doing. He is deciding to legalize 5 million illegals on this extraordinary bootstrap argument that they've got children here. Now, if ever there is an incentive to cross the border and have a child, that's it. Sometimes local prosecutors will act more categorically and say, well, in general, let's say marijuana offenses, I think this is a mistake, but is not going to be our top priority in deciding what cases to prosecute and take to court. But they still have the flexibility to look at it as an individual, on an individual basis. And Obama himself, I mean, the shamelessness. We've heard Larry Kudlow mention last night the Jonathan Gruber quote that was caught about the stupidity of the American public. That was not an accidental quote. That's what these people believe, because Obama thinks that we're so stupid that before the election, he was quite explicit in saying, I'm not going to pass my executive amnesty now because it's so unpopular. And it would result in too many Democrats losing their seats. Well, that happened anyway. But he actually said, I'm going to do it afterwards, when it's not going to matter. He thinks we're not going to notice this. But he's also said several years ago that he wouldn't do this because it's so blatantly unconstitutional. Well, it was until it wasn't, I guess. Things change. That's what a living constitution is. It lived another year, and then he decided he has the power to basically create a law himself. Oh, thank you. I'm going through. Oh, do you think that's going to work? All right, I better get to this quick. It's on a slope.
Hi, Heather.
Hi.
I'm Holly Strom from Los Angeles.
Aha.
And I was,
fellow
of
messenger.
course, I agree with everything you said about California.
Thank you.
And
You
I
see
was
it.
hoping that you could comment about the recent, well, a couple of things. I don't know what the Hispanic prison population, what the percentage is in California, but I suspect it's pretty high. And how is that early release program from the prisons, the grading of certain crimes from felonies to misdemeanors and the emptying out of the jails and prisons, how is that impacting crime in California?
I see. Well, the Hispanic population in California, especially in Los Angeles, is about 20% illegal aliens, which is higher. They're disproportionately involved in felony crime. It tends to be about, overall, somewhat proportionate to their population because blacks are, when you compare it to the entire alien population, is a higher rate, but it's much higher than whites. The rule of thumb for Black and Hispanic and white crime rates is that the Black crime rate is about 7 times higher than the white rate. The Hispanic rate is about 3 to 4 times higher than the white rate. So that means, this is interesting, if Hispanics are moving into a predominantly black neighborhood, as they did in South Central Los Angeles, the crime rate actually goes down somewhat. But if they move into a predominantly white neighborhood, as we saw when the vast migration of Hispanics across the country started happening into Virginia, West Virginia, crime rates start shooting up, and you see gang activity. The MS-13 started coming to East Coast cities that had never been there before. So they're sort of in the middle of criminality. But as I say, one meme that you hear a lot from the advocates is that immigrants have a much lower rate of criminality than natives. That's hard to say because the federal government does such a good job of not asking status when they can. But what has been documented is between the first and second generation, as I say, the crime rate shoots way up because we are creating a second underclass culture. Our questioner asked a very complicated question. There's a program going on in California that Jerry Brown instigated in response to a long-standing litigation between the prison advocates and the state about the conditions in California's prisons. And Jerry Brown, to his credit, fought this thing, and he has been pouring billions into California prison medical care. So it's now gold-plated. It's better than the federal government provides, and yet the advocates are still claiming that it's unconstitutional. My judge that I clerked for in Los Angeles, Judge Stephen Reinhart, who's probably the most left-wing judge in the country, this is when I was still a liberal by default as one is, unless you think your way out of the received wisdom in this country. So I clerked for him after law school. And alas, he's on this federal panel that has been holding California responsible for putting more and more billions of dollars into health care. Brown, to his credit, fought this thing for a long time. And what they started doing is recategorizing felonies as misdemeanors and shipping people who ordinarily would have gone to prison to jails. It's known as realignment. And it's one of these semantic switches. You're no longer a felon, you're a misdemeanor. You've committed a theft, you've engaged in very high-level drug dealing, but now you're just a misdemeanor, so you're going to go to county jails. Well, now what? Guess what? The county jails are bursting. They're releasing people early. The jail sheriffs have the possibility of early releases, and sex offenders are cutting off their GPS bracelets with impunity because they know that the jails are so full that they're not going to go back. So this is a massive shift in the California criminal justice landscape and is resulting in a rise in crime. Certain Southern California localities like Pomona, San Bernardino, Riverside have had huge increases in robbery and other felonies. But it's sort of under the public awareness radar screen, but you're obviously very an astute observer of the criminal justice system in California. And I'm sure there's an immigration component to that as well, because the absolute number of offenders in California are Hispanic. And of course, you know, the gang situation in these prisons is just extraordinary. I went to the Chino prison, which is in the Inland Empire east of Orange County, and it's the usual situation where the Hispanics play basketball at one time, and if a black or a white goes on the court, you know, there's going to be a fight, there's going to be violence, and they bring that mentality with them from the streets, but they come back with it even worse. And nobody has an idea really how to break that down, but it's a very disturbing situation. And, you know, we're very used to in this country talking about white racism, and we forget that blacks and Hispanics have a lot of racism towards each other and towards whites.
Can you help us, Heather? Thanks for suffering through your cold.
Thank you.
Help us with the motivation here. I can't call our president a knowing traitor. I can't call him stupid. He went to Harvard Law School. He ran the law review there. We say in the law business it's all about money, power, and glory. I did hear you say that in the 60s there was an effort to try to lock in a Democratic voting class. What is the motivation? What is behind this? Because everything you say is self-evident to me. It should be obvious to everybody that's a citizen of this country. And yet, except for unusual venues like this, even in a place like North Dakota, where I come from, you can't say a thing.
I know.
Diversity is a wonderful thing. We can't be mean. I just got done reading Vogel's book called The Pity Party. And he says that it's all a matter of feeling good, the self-fulfilling feeling you get from pitying people and helping people. That doesn't get me all the way either. I'm sure you've thought about this. If we can identify what the motivation is here, that might give us a clue as to how we go forward. What is your attitude? What is your best guess about what the motivation of these people are?
That's a great question, and there's so many answers to it. There is obviously crass political self-interest. Hispanics, and again, when we talk about mass illegal immigration, that is, let's be honest, that is what we're talking about. What we have today is unlike what the lauded immigration history of this country was at the turn of the 20th century, when you had different countries, different languages, sending in equal parts immigrants. And that did not have a predominant culture. And then we had in the 1920s an immigration pause. We basically closed the borders because people were saying we don't have assimilation going on, and they were right. And that allowed people over time to, in fact, join American culture. What we have now is very different. Mexicans alone are way over 50% of all legal immigrants. And when you talk about illegal immigration, it's way even more so taken up by Central America and Mexico. So I think there's a political calculation going on because these immigrants are just resolutely Democratic voters. And Larry Kudlow spoke so importantly last night about family breakdown. I could not agree more. It is a social catastrophe, and it is the biggest problem, social problem facing this country. Single mothers are the frequent flyers of government programs because they are so inevitably poor that they are the overwhelming consumers of poverty programs. And with the Hispanic out-of-wedlock birth rate, and when you hear conservatives talking about Hispanic family values, I laugh. Extended family, yes, but the nuclear family is not there. So Democrats see this, and they know that what they have is many generations of welfare consumers and ways of expanding the state. Years ago, I was on the O'Reilly radio show on Fox, and he asked me back then if there was another motivation, which was an innate hostility to Western civilization, the rule of law, and a certain tradition of Anglo-American and European culture and civilization. And back then, I hedged, and I wasn't willing, because that's a very provocative statement, and I just fudged a little bit. But I hope this isn't on Twitter. There's a part of me that actually now agrees with that I think the diversity ideology is not just a positive statement, it's a negative one as well. And it is targeted at what this country has been and is determined to destroy that. And we are losing, as I say, the universities. It breaks my heart because there is nothing that is more important to me than the preservation of the humanities and Western civilization. We should be down on our knees before these creations of Mozart and Bach and Aeschylus and Tiepolo, and it is all being trashed now in the universities. You people probably know it, but I am astounded by how many Americans are still clueless. And the universities are obviously the primary engines of the diversity ideology. It's about race, but it's also about gender. And the feminists have taken over the university. They're also why it's so darn hard, going to be so hard to reconstitute the two-parent biological family because of the preposterous feminist idea that women can do it all, and that means raising children. No, actually, men and women bring complementary skills in raising children, and boys need their fathers. But that is becoming impossible to say now, mostly because of feminism, but also because of gay marriage. Because I predict there's going to come a moment when Father's Day is declared a hate crime. Because it means that you're dissing that child in the classroom with two lesbian mothers. So things are getting very complicated and very difficult.
This will be our final question.
Okay. Which is?
Good morning. Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you. My pleasure.
I'm Judy from Wisconsin,
Thank you, Judy.
and I agree with everything. I have studied the Constitution and made my students outline it, and that time has passed for me. My question is, what can we do? We have already raised, between my sister and me, 4 sons who adhere to our values, and they are raising 7 grandchildren. But what else can we do?
That's such a heartbreaking question. And Larry Kudlow's an optimist, as he said last night. It's really a genetic thing. I'm not. I tend towards pessimism, and obviously I see the world as a lot of empirical validation for that. But let me try to be an optimist and say that people like you who so understand the preciousness of this civilization and its legacy, if you can keep telling your friends that it's at risk and continue to fight for schools and for an education that asks only one thing, is this a work of beauty? I was an undergraduate at a time when this crazy literary theory known as deconstruction was taking over the humanities in the 1970s. I was at Yale, which was the bastion of it. But I view myself as very fortunate because I went to school at a time when nobody asked, what's the gender or race of this author? I was allowed to read Milton and Chaucer and Spencer and Wordsworth and Shakespeare without anybody complaining. And that's not possible anymore. So we have to start fighting for the primacy of genius and beauty and say that race and gender does not matter. It doesn't, I could not care less about reading female authors. All I want to know is, am I reading somebody that possesses language and sees the truth of human existence? And now that view is viewed as blind and insufficiently narcissistic. We have a culture of narcissism now where every student just wants to study himself. If he's gay, he wants to study gayness. If he's a female, he wants to study females. If he's a black, he wants to study blacks. No, education is about moving outside of yourself, outside of your petty, narrow conceptions to Shakespeare actually knew something more than we did. Let's acknowledge that. So all I can say is we fight the battle. Sometimes you feel like you're not losing, you're not winning, but you got to go down fighting at least. Thank you.